But We Try Not to Act Like It by Orson Scott Card. Originally published in the August and September 1979 issue of Destinies from Ace Books. Republished in issue number 4 of Nova Science Fiction magazine in 1984, and again in a collection of the author's works called Maps in a Mirror, the short fiction of Orson Scott Card, in 1990. Read by Darrell T. Smith II for my channel, Quasar Spectra. But We Try Not to Act Like It. There was no line. Hiram Cloward commented on it to the pointy-faced man behind the counter. There's no line. This is the complaint department. We pride ourselves on having few complaints. The pointy-faced man had a prim little smile that irritated Hiram. What's the matter with your television? It shows nothing but soaps. That's what's the matter. And asinine gothics. Well, that's programming, sir, not mechanical at all. It's mechanical. I can't turn the damn set off. What's your name and social security number? Hiram Cloward, 528-80-693-8837. Address, ARF 487 U7B. That's singles, sir. Of course you can't turn off your set. You mean because I'm not married, I can't turn off my television? According to congressionally authorized scientific studies carried out over a 3-year period from 1989 to 1991, it is imperative that persons living alone have the constant companionship of their television sets. I like solitude. I also like silence. But the Congress passed a law, sir, and we can't disobey the law. Can't I talk to somebody intelligent? The pointy-faced man flared a moment, his eyes burning, but he instantly regained his composure and said in measured tones, As a matter of fact, as soon as any complainant becomes offensive or hostile, we immediately refer them to Section A6. What's that, the hit squad? It's behind that door. And Hiram followed the pointing finger to the glass door at the far end of the waiting room. Inside was an office, which was filled with comfortable, homey knickknacks, several chairs, a desk, and a man so offensively Nordic that even Hitler would have resented him. Hello, the Aryan said warmly. Hi. Please sit down. Hiram sat, the courtesy and warmth making him feel even more resentful. Did they think they could fool him into believing he was not being grossly imposed upon? So, you don't like something about your programming, said the Aryan. Your programming, you mean? It sure as hell isn't mine. I don't know why Bell Television thinks it has the right to impose its idea of fun and entertainment on me 24 hours a day, but I'm fed up with it. It was bad enough when there was some variety, but for the last 2 months I've been getting nothing but soaps and gothics. It took you 2 months to notice? I try to ignore the set. I like to read. You can bet that if I had more than my stinking little pension from our loving government, I could pay to have a room where there wasn't a TV, so I could have some peace. I really can't help your financial situation, and the law's the law. Is that all I'm going to hear from you? The law? I could have heard that from the pointy-faced jerk out there. Mr. Cloward, looking at your records, I can certainly see that soaps and gothics are not appropriate for you. They aren't appropriate, Hiram said, for anyone with an IQ over 8. The Aryan nodded. You feel that people who enjoy soaps and gothics aren't the intellectual equals of people who don't. Damn right. I have a PhD in literature, for heaven's sake. The Aryan was all sympathy. Of course you don't like soaps. I'm sure it's a mistake. We try not to make mistakes, but we're only human, except the computers, of course. It was a joke, but Hiram didn't laugh. The Aryan kept up the small talk as he looked at the computer terminal that he could see, and Hiram could not. We may be the only television company in town, you know, but you try not to act like it. Yes, aha, well, you must have heard our advertising. Constantly. Well, let's see now. Hiram Cloward, Ph.D., Nebraska, 1981, English literature, 20th century, with a minor in Russian literature, dissertation on Dostoevsky's influence on English language novelists. A near-perfect class attendance record and a reputation for arrogance and competence. How much do you know about me? Only the standard consumer research data, but we do have a bit of a problem. Hiram waited, but the Aryan merely punched a button, leaned back, and looked at Hiram. His eyes were kindly and warm and intense. It made Hiram uncomfortable. Mr. Cloward, yes? You are unemployed. Not willingly. Few people are willingly unemployed, Mr. Cloward. But you have no job. You also have no family. You also have no friends. That's consumer research? What, only people with friends buy Rice Krispies? As a matter of fact, Rice Krispies are favored by solitary people. We have to know who is more likely to be receptive to advertising, and we direct our programming accordingly. Hiram remembered that he ate Rice Krispies for breakfast almost every morning. He vowed on the spot to switch to something else. Quaker Oats, for instance. Surely they were more gregarious. You understand the importance of the Selective Programming Broadcast Act of 1985, yes? Yes. It was deemed unfair by the Supreme Court for all programming to be geared to the majority. Minorities were being slighted, and so Bell Television was given the assignment of preparing an individually selected broadcast system so that each individual, in his own home, would have the programming perfect for him. I know all this. I must go over it again anyway, Mr. Cloward, because I'm going to have to help you understand why there can be no change in your programming. Hiram stiffened in his chair, his hands flexing. I knew you bastards wouldn't change. Mr. Cloward, we bastards would be delighted to change, but we're very closely regulated by the government to provide the most healthful programming for every American citizen. Now, I will continue my review. I'll just go home, if you don't mind. Mr. Cloward, we are directed to prepare programming for minorities as small as 10,000 people, but no smaller. Even for minorities of 10,000, the programming is ridiculously expensive. A program seen by so few costs far more per watching minute to produce than one seen by 30 or 40 million. However, you belong to a minority even smaller than 10,000. But that makes me feel so special. Furthermore, the Consumer Protection Broadcast Act of 1989 and the regulations of the Consumer Broadcast Agency since then have given us very strict guidelines. Mr. Cloward, we cannot show you any program with overt acts of violence. Why not? Because you have tendencies toward hostility that are only exacerbated by viewing violence. Similarly, we cannot show you any programs with sex. Cloward's face turned red. You have no sex life whatsoever, Mr. Cloward. Do you realize how dangerous that is? You don't even masturbate. The tension and hostility inside you must be tremendous. Cloward leaped to his feet. There were limits to what a man had to put up with. He headed for the door. Mr. Cloward, I'm sorry. The Aryan followed him to the door. I don't make these things up. Wouldn't you rather know why these decisions are reached? Hiram stopped at the door, his hand on the knob. The Aryan was right. Better to know why than to hate them for it. How? Hiram asked. How do they know what I do and do not do within the walls of my home? We don't know, of course, but we're pretty sure. We've studied people for years. We know that people who have certain buying patterns and certain living patterns behave in certain ways. And unfortunately, you have strong destructive tendencies. Repression and denial are your primary means of adaptation to stress. That, and unfortunately, occasionally acting out. The hell does all that mean? It means that you lie to yourself until you can't anymore, and then you attack somebody. Hiram's face was packed with hot blood, throbbing. I must look like a tomato, he told himself, and deliberately calmed himself. I don't care, he thought. They're wrong anyway. Damn scientific tests. Aren't there any movies you could program for me? I am sorry, no. Not all movies have sex and violence. The Aryan smiled soothingly. The movies that don't wouldn't interest you anyway. Then turn the damn thing off and let me read. We can't do that. Can't you turn it down? No. I'm so sick of hearing all about Sarah Wynne and her damn love life. But isn't Sarah Wynne attractive? Asked the Aryan. That stopped Hiram cold. He dreamed about Sarah Wynne at night. He said nothing. He had no attraction to Sarah Wynne. Isn't she? The Aryan insisted. Isn't who what? Sarah Wynne. Who was talking about Sarah Wynne? What about documentaries? Mr. Cloward, you would become extremely hostile if the news programs were broadcast to you. You know that. Walter Cronkite's dead. Maybe I'd like them better now. You don't care about the news of the real world, Mr. Cloward, do you? No. Then you see where we are. Not one iota of our programming is really appropriate for you, but 90% of it is downright harmful to you, and we can't turn the television off because of the Solitude Act. Do you see our dilemma? Do you see mine? Of course, Mr. Cloward, and I sympathize completely. Make some friends, Mr. Cloward, and we'll turn off your television. And so the interview was over. For 2 days, Cloward brooded. All the time he did, Sarah Wynne was grieving over her 3 days' husband who had just been killed in a car wreck on Wiltshire Boulevard, wherever the hell that was. But now the body was scarcely cold, and already her old suitors were back, trying to help her, trying to push their love on her. Can't you let yourself depend on me just a little? Asked Teddy, the handsome one with lots of money. I don't like depending on people, Sarah answered. You depended on George. George was the husband's name, the dead one. I know, she said, and cried for a moment. Sarah Wynne was good at crying. Hiram Cloward turned another page in The Brothers Karamazov. You need friends, Teddy insisted. Oh, Teddy, I know it, she said, weeping. Will you be my friend? Who writes this stuff? Hiram Cloward asked aloud. Maybe the Aryan in the television company offices had been right. Make some friends. Get the damn set turned off, whatever the cost. He got up from his chair and went out into the corridor in the apartment building. Clearly posted on the walls were several announcements. Chess Club, Wednesday. Encounter groups nightly at 7. Learn to knit, 6:30. Bring yarn and needles. Games in game room, basement. Just want to chat? Friends of the family, 7:30 to 10:30, nightly. Friends of the family? Hiram snorted. Family was his maudlin mother and her constant weeping about how hard life was and how no one in her right mind would ever be born a woman if anybody had any choice. But there was no choice, and marriage was a trap men sprung on women, giving them a few minutes of pleasure for a lifetime of drudgery. And I swear to God, if it wasn't for my little baby Hiram, I'd ditch that bastard for good. It's for your sake I don't leave, my little baby, because if I leave, you'll grow up into a macho bastard like your beer-belly father. And friends? What friends ever come around when good old Dad is boozing and belting the living crap out of everybody he can get his hands on? I read. That's what I do. The Prince and the Pauper, Connecticut Yankee, Pride and Prejudice, Worlds Within Worlds Within Worlds, all so pretty and polite and funny as hell. Friends of the family. Worth a shot, anyway. Hiram went to the elevator and descended 18 floors to the fun floor. Friends of the family were in quite a large room with alcohol at one end and soda pop at the other. Hiram was surprised to discover that the term soda pop had been revived. He walked to the cola sign and asked the woman for a Coke. "How many cups of coffee have you had today?" she asked. "3. Oh, then I'm so sorry, but I can't give you a soda pop with caffeine in it. May I suggest Sprite?" "You may not," Hiram said, clenching his teeth. "We're too damn overprotected." "Exactly how I feel," said a woman standing beside him, Sprite in hand. "They protect and protect and protect, and what good does it do? People still die, you know." "I suspected as much," Hiram said, struggling for a smile, wondering if his humor sounded funny or merely sarcastic. Apparently funny. The woman laughed. "Oh, you're a gem, you are," she said. "What do you do?" "I'm a detached professor of literature at Princeton." "But how can you live here and work there?" He shrugged. "I don't work there. I said detached. When the new television teaching came in, my IQ was too low. I'm not a screen personality." "So few of us are," she said sagely, nodding and smiling. "Oh, how I long for the good old days, when ugly men like David Brinkley could deliver the news. You remember Brinkley?" "Actually, no," she said, laughing. "I just remember my mother talking about him." Hiram looked at her appreciatively. Nose not very straight, of course, but that seemed to be the only thing keeping her off TV. Nice voice. Nice face. Body. She put her hand on his thigh. "What are you doing tonight?" she asked. "Watching television," he grimaced. "Really? What do you have?" "Sarah Wynne." She squealed in delight. "Oh, how wonderful! We must be kindred spirits, then. I have Sarah Wynne, too." Hiram tried to smile. "Can I come up to your apartment?" Danger signal. Hand moving up thigh. Invitation to apartment. Sex. "No." "Why not?" And Hiram remembered that the only way he could ever get rid of the television was to prove that he wasn't solitary, and fixing up his sex life, i.e., having one, would go a long way toward changing their damn profiles. "Come on," he said, and they left the friends of the family without further ado. Inside the apartment, she immediately took off her shoes and blouse and sat down on the old-fashioned sofa in front of the TV. "Oh," she said, "so many books. You really are a professor, aren't you?" "Yeah," he said, vaguely sensing that the next move was up to him, and not having the faintest idea of what the next move was. He thought back to his only fumbling attempt at sex when he was, 13? No, 14, and the girl was 15 and was doing it on a lark. She had walked with him up the creek bed, back when there were creeks and open country, and suddenly she had stopped and unzipped his pants, back when there were zippers. But he was finished before she had hardly started, and gave up in disgust and took his pants and ran away. Her name was Diana. He went home without his pants and had no rational explanation, and his mother had treated him with loathing and brought it up again and again for years afterward. How a man is a man no matter how you treat him, and he'll still get it when he can. Who cares about the poor girl? But Hiram was used to that kind of talk. It rolled off him. What haunted him was the uncontrolled shivering of his body, the ecstasy of it, and then the look of disgust on the girl's face. He had thought it was because, well, never mind. Never mind, he thought. I don't think of this anymore. Come on, said the woman. What's your name? Hiram asked. She looked at the ceiling. Agnes, for heaven's sake, come on. He decided that taking off his shirt might be a good idea. She watched, then decided to help. No, he said. What? Don't touch me. Oh, for Pete's sake, what's wrong? Impotent? Not at all. Not at all. Just uninterested. Is that all right? Look, I don't want to play around with a psycho case, all right? I've got better things to do. I make 100 a whack. That's what I charge. That's standard, right? Standard what? Hiram nodded because he didn't dare ask what she was talking about. But you, obviously, heaven knows how, buddy. You sure as hell obviously don't know what's going on in the world. $20. Enough for the 10 minutes you've screwed up for me, right? I don't have 20, Hiram said. Her eyes got tight. A fairy and a deadbeat. What a pick. Look, buddy, next time you try pickup, figure out what you want to do with her first, right? She picked up her shoes and blouse and left. Hiram stood there. Teddy, no, said Sarah Wynne. But I need you. I need you so desperately, said Teddy on the screen. It's only been a few days. How can I sleep with another man only a few days after George was killed? Only 4 days ago we... Oh, no, Teddy, please. Then when? How soon? I love you so much. Drivel, George thought in his analytical mind, but nevertheless, obviously based on the Penelope story. No doubt her George, her Odysseus, would return, miraculously alive, ready to sweep her back into wedded bliss. But in the meantime, the suitors, enough suitors to sell 15,000 cars and 100,000 boxes of Tampax and 400,000 packages of Captain Crunch. The non-analytical part of his mind, however, was not the least bit concerned with Penelope. For some reason, he was clasping and unclasping his hands in front of him. For some reason, he was shaking. For some reason, he fell to his knees at the couch, his hands clasping and unclasping around Crime and Punishment, as his eyes strained to cry, but could not. Sarah Wynne wept. But she can cry easily, Hiram thought. It's not fair that she should cry so easily. Spin flax, Penelope. The alarm went off, but Hiram was already awake. In front of him, the television was singing about Dove with lanolin. The products haven't changed, Hiram thought. Never change. They were advertising Dove with lanolin in the little market carts around the base of the cross while Jesus bled to death, no doubt, for softer skin. He got up, got dressed, tried to read, couldn't, tried to remember what had happened last night to leave him so upset and nervous, but couldn't. And at last he decided to go back to the Aryan at the Bell Television offices. Mr. Cloward, said the Aryan. "You're a psychiatrist, aren't you?" Hiram asked. "Why, Mr. Cloward, I'm an A6 complaint representative from Bell Television. What can I do for you?" "I can't stand Sarah Wynne anymore," Hiram said. "Well, that's a shame. Things are finally going to work out for her, starting in about 2 weeks." And in spite of himself, Hiram wanted to ask what was going to happen. It isn't fair for this Nordic Uberman to know what sweet little Sarah is going to be doing weeks before I do. But he fought down the feeling, ashamed that he was getting caught up in the damn soap. "Help me," Hiram said. "How can I help you?" "You can change my life. You can get the television out of my apartment." "Why, Mr. Cloward?" the Aryan asked. "It's the one thing in life that's absolutely free, except that you get to watch commercials, and you know as well as I do that the commercials are downright entertaining. Why, there are people who actually choose to have double the commercials in their personal programming. We get 1,000 requests a day for the latest McDonald's ad. You have no idea." "I have a very good idea. I want to read. I want to be alone." "On the contrary, Mr. Cloward, you long not to be alone. You desperately need a friend." Anger. "And what makes you so damn sure of that?" "Because, Mr. Cloward, your response is completely typical of your group. It's a group we're very concerned about. We don't have a budget to program for you. There are only about 2,000 of you in the country. But a budget wouldn't do us much good because we really don't know what kind of programming you want." "I am not part of any group." "Oh, you are so much a part of it that you could be called typical. Dominant mother, absent and or hostile father, no long-term relationships with anybody, no sex life." "I have a sex life." "If you have in fact attempted any sexual activity, it was undoubtedly with a prostitute, and she expected too high a level of sophistication from you. You are easily ashamed. You couldn't cope, and so you have not had intercourse, correct?" "What are you? What are you trying to do to me?" "I am a psychoanalyst, of course. Anybody whose complaints can't be handled by our bureaucratic authority figure out in front obviously needs help, not another bureaucrat. I want to help you. I'm your friend." And suddenly the anger was replaced by the utter incongruity of this Nordic masterman wanting to help little Hiram Cloward. The unemployed professor laughed. "Humor! Very healthy," said the Aryan. "What is this? I thought shrinks were supposed to be subtle." "With some people, notably paranoids, which you're not, and schizoids, which you are not either." "And what am I?" "I told you, denial and repression strategies, very unhealthy. Acting out, less healthy yet. But you're extremely intelligent, able to do many things. I personally think it's a damn shame you can't teach." "I'm an excellent teacher." "Tests with randomly selected students showed that you had an extremely heavy emphasis on esoterica. Only people like you would really enjoy a class from a person like you. There aren't many people like you. You don't fit into many of the normal categories." "And so I'm being persecuted." "Well, don't try to pretend to be paranoid." The Aryan smiled. Hiram smiled back. This is insane. "Lewis Carroll, where are you now that we really need you?" "If you're a shrink, then I should talk freely to you." "If you like." "I don't like." "And why not?" "Because you're so god-utterly damn Aryan, that's why." The Aryan leaned forward with interest. "Does that bother you?" "It makes me want to throw up." "And why is that?" The look of interest was too keen, too delightful. Hiram couldn't resist. "You don't know about my experiences in the war, then, is that it?" What war? There hasn't been a war recently enough. I was very, very young. It was in Germany. My parents aren't really my parents. They were in Germany with the American Embassy. In Berlin in 1938, before the war broke out. My real parents were there too. German Jews, or half Jews anyway. My real father, but let that pass. You don't need my whole genealogy. Let's just say that when I was only 11 days old, totally unregistered, my real Jewish father took me to his friend, Mr. Cloward, in the American Embassy, whose wife had just had a miscarriage. "Take my child," he said. "Why?" Cloward asked. "Because my wife and I have a perfect, utterly foolproof plan to kill Hitler, but there's no way for us to survive it." And so Cloward, my adopted father, took me in. And then the next day he read in the papers about how my real parents had been killed in an accident in the street. He investigated and discovered that just by chance, while my parents were on their way to carry out their foolproof plan, some brown shirts in the street had seen them. Someone pointed them out as Jews. They were bored, so they attacked them. Had no idea they were saving Hitler's life, of course. These Nordic mastermen started beating my mother, forcing my father to watch as they stripped her and raped her, and then disemboweled her. My father was then subjected to experimental use of the latest model testicle crusher until he bit off his own tongue in agony and bled to death. I don't like Nordic types. Hiram sat back, his eyes full of tears and emotion, and realized that he had actually been able to cry. Not much, but it was hopeful. "Mr. Cloward," said the Aryan, "you were born in Missouri in 1951. Your parents of record are your natural parents." Hiram smiled. "But it was one hell of a Freudian fantasy, wasn't it? My mother raped, my father emasculated to death, myself divorced from my true heritage, etc., etc." The Aryan smiled. "You should be a writer, Mr. Cloward." "I'd rather read. Please, let me read." "I can't stop you from reading." "Turn off Sarah Wynne. Turn off the mansions from which young girls flee from the menace of a man who turns out to be friendly and loving. Turn off the commercials for cars and condoms." "And leave you alone to wallow in cataleptic fantasies among your depressing Russian novels?" Hiram shook his head. "Am I begging?" he wondered. "Yes," he decided. "I'm begging. My Russian novels aren't depressing. They're exalting, uplifting, overwhelming." "It's part of your sickness, Mr. Cloward, that you long to be overwhelmed." "Every time I read Dostoevsky, I feel fulfilled." "You have read everything by Dostoevsky 20 times over, and everything by Tolstoy a dozen times." "Every time I read Dostoevsky is the first time." "We can't leave you alone." "I'll kill myself," Hiram shouted. "I can't live like this much longer." "Then make friends," the Aryan said simply. Hiram gasped and panted, gathering his rage back under control. "This is not happening. I'm not angry. Put it away. Put it back. Get control. Smile. Smile at the Aryan." "You're my friend, right?" Hiram asked. "If you'll let me," the Aryan answered. "I'll let you," Hiram said. Then he got up and left the office. On the way home, he passed a church. He had often seen the church before. He had little interest in religion. It had been too thoroughly dissected for him in the novels. What Twain had left alive, Dostoevsky had withered and Pasternak had killed. But his mother was a passionate Presbyterian. He went into the church. At the front of the building was a huge television screen. On it, a very charismatic young man was speaking. The tones were subdued. Only those in the front could hear it. Those in the back seemed to be meditating. Cloward knelt at a bench to meditate too. But he could not take his eyes off the screen. The young man stepped aside, and an older man took his place, intoning something about Christ. Hiram could hear the word Christ, but no others. The walls were decorated with crosses, row on row of crosses. This was a Protestant church. None of the crosses contained a figure of Jesus bleeding, but Hiram's imagination supplied him nonetheless. Jesus, his hands and wrists nailed to the cross, his feet pegged to the cross, his throat at the intersection of the beams. Why the cross, after all? The intersection of two utterly opposite lines, perpendiculars that can only touch at one point, the epitome of the life of man, passing through eternity without a backward glance at those encountered along the way, each in his own, endlessly divergent direction. The cross. But not at all the symbol of today, Hiram decided. Today we are in spheres. Today we are curves, not lines, bending back on ourselves, touching everybody again and again, wrapped up inside little balls, none of us daring to be at the outside. Pull me in, we cry. Pull me and keep me safe. Don't let me fall out. Don't let me fall off the edge of the world. But the world has an edge now, and we can all see it, Hiram decided. We know where it is, and we can't bear to let anyone find his own way of staying on top. Or do I want to stay on top? The age of crosses is over. Now the age of spheres, balls. "We are your friends," said the old man on the screen. "We can help you." "There is a grandeur," Hiram answered silently, "about muddling through alone." "Why be alone when Jesus can take your burden?" said the man on the screen. "If I were alone," Hiram answered, "there would be no burden to bear." "Pick up your cross, fight the good fight," said the man on the screen. "If only," Hiram answered, "I could find my cross to pick it up." Then Hiram realized that he still could not hear the voice from the television. Instead, he had been supplying his own sermon out loud. 3 people near him in the back of the church were watching him. He smiled sheepishly, ducked his head in apology, and left. He walked home, whistling. Sarah Wynn's voice greeted him. "Teddy, Teddy, what have we done? Look what we've done." "It was beautiful," Teddy said. "I'm glad of it." "Oh, Teddy, how can I ever forgive myself?" And Sarah wept. Hiram stood transfixed, watching the screen. Penelope had given in. Penelope had left her flax and fornicated with a suitor. "This is wrong," he thought. "This is wrong," he said. "I love you, Sarah," Teddy said. "I can't bear it, Teddy," she answered. "I feel that in my heart I have murdered George. I have betrayed him." "Penelope, is there no virtue in the world? Is there no Artemis hunting? Just Aphrodite bedding down every hour on the hour with every man, god, or sheep that promised forever and delivered a moment? The bargains are never fulfilled. Never," Hiram thought. At that moment, on the screen, George walked in. "My dear," he exclaimed, "my dear Sarah, I've been wandering with amnesia for days. It was a hitchhiker who was burned to death in my car. I'm home." And Hiram screamed and screamed and screamed. The Aryan found out about it quickly, at the same time that he got an alarming report from the research teams analyzing the soaps. He shook his head, a sick feeling in the pit of his stomach. Poor Mr. Cloward. What an agony we do in the name of protecting people, the Aryan thought. I'm sorry, he said to Hiram, but Hiram paid him no attention. He just sat on the floor watching the television set. As soon as the report had come in, of course, all the soaps, especially Sarah Wynn's, had gone off the air. Now the game shows were on, a temporary replacement until errors could be corrected. I'm so sorry, the Aryan said, but Hiram tried to shrug him away. A black woman had just traded the box for the money in the envelope. It was what Hiram would have done, and it paid off. $5,000 instead of a donkey pulling a cart with a monkey in it. She had just avoided being zonked. Mr. Cloward, I thought the problem was with you, but it wasn't at all. I mean, you were marginal, all right, but we didn't realize what Sarah Wynn was doing to people. Sarah Schmera, Hiram said, silently, watching the screen. The black woman was bounding up and down in delight. It was entirely our fault. There are thousands of marginals just like you who were seriously damaged by Sarah Wynn. We had no idea how powerful the identification was. We had no idea. Of course not, thought Hiram. You didn't read enough. You didn't know what the myths do to people. But now was the big deal of the day, and Hiram shook his head to make the Aryan go away. Of course, the Consumer Protection Agency will pay you a lifetime compensation, 3 times your present salary and whatever treatment is possible. At last, Hiram's patience ended. Go away, he said. I have to see if the black woman there is going to get the car. I just can't decide, the black woman said. Door number 3, Hiram shouted. Please, God, door number 3. The Aryan watched Hiram silently. Door number 2, the black woman finally decided. Hiram groaned. The announcer smiled. Well, said the announcer, is the car behind door number 2? Let's just see. The curtain opened, and behind it was a man in a hillbilly costume strumming a beat-up-looking banjo. The audience moaned. The man with the banjo sang Home on the Range. The black woman sighed. They opened the curtains, and there was the car behind door number 3. I knew it, Hiram said, bitterly. They never listen to me. Door number 3, I say, and they never do it. The Aryan turned to leave. I told you, didn't I? Hiram asked, weeping. Yes, the Aryan said. I knew it. I knew it all along. I was right. Hiram sobbed into his hands. Yeah, the Aryan answered, and then he left to sign all the necessary papers for the commitment. Now, Cloward fit into a category. No one can exist outside one for long. The Aryan realized. We are creating a new man, Homo categoricus, the classified man. But the papers didn't have to be signed after all. Instead, Hiram went into the bathroom, filled the tub, and joined the largest category of all. Damn, the Aryan said when he heard about it.